Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Karen. It's so wonderful to be here. Welcome to Creating Safe Classrooms, Unpacking Identity-Based Trauma, Part 2. Part 2. I'm Dr. Erica Millsaps, and I'm from Northwestern University, and I will let Tracy introduce herself.
Thank you, Erica. Hi, everybody. My name is Tracy Fahrenbach. I also work at Northwestern University, and Erica is going to take us through this first part. But the one idea I wanted to share pretty early in, if it's okay, Erica, is
Absolutely.
thank you, is just to acknowledge that we may have today with us a group of folks that are equally or even more expert in this material than we are. And likewise, we may have some folks that are quite new to this or novices. And we just want to say right up at the beginning that everyone is welcome in this space. So bring what you know, feel free to share what you know, and feel free to come not knowing very much at all. So I'll pass it back to you, Erica.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Um, for those of you who did not or were not able to join us last, just a reminder, again, this is part two, so we are continuing and building upon the discussion from last week. And so this second webinar really focuses on strategies, resources that staff or that other professionals can use when working with young people to increase the felt sense of safety in the classroom. But the other thing that we are going to share today is just how important it is for us to keep in mind that the work that you do is difficult and it can and often does have an impact on your well-being. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to share some strategies and some resources to support you as well. So, with that being said, if you were not able to join us last week, we just wanted to share a list of all of the webinars that are part of this series. The first two, recognizing trauma and its impact, and then intervention strategies. And then last week, really focusing on unpacking identity-based trauma. And as I mentioned today, our goals will be to kind of continue and build upon that earlier discussion. And so, just to recap, last week in part one, we really focused on orienting everyone to concepts related to identity-based stress and trauma, because as Tracy just mentioned, everyone brings different experiences, different levels of expertise to the table. And so we recognize that. And this is one way that we can ensure that we are all on the same page, speaking the same language, have that baseline level of awareness, whether it's new information, whether it's repeat information. And so last time we focused it on just really understanding identity-based trauma. However, we did bring forward and focus a little bit more on race-based trauma. We also talked about the impact this has on children, that sometimes it can go unrecognized. And we talked about how this sort of stress can kind of build over time when we think about identity-based stress and trauma. And it does have a negative impact on academic function, overall well-being for not just young people, but also for professionals, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So just to give you a little bit of a review, and kind of reorient us to today's. And so our learning objectives for the day is to share what we can do to create safe classrooms and schools for all young people, families, and professionals. And we also, as I mentioned, want to recognize the impact this work can have on staff well-being, on your own well-being, with a focus again on race-based stress and trauma. And we'll talk a little bit about strategies for staff wellness. And then finally, what we'd like to do is to really support your lifelong learning. We are all lifelong learners, by sharing resources, a number of great resources that you can dig into, unpack when you have time that help to increase your knowledge and awareness and hopefully inspire your practice in this area related to everything that we'll be talking about today, as well as what was shared last week. So those are our learning objectives. And before I turn it over to Trace, I just wanted to say thank you again for holding space for us today, holding time in your very busy schedules. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself the next 90 minutes, and I will hand it over to Tracy.
Thank you, Erica. That was a perfect segue. Um, we were really impressed with the audience that we had for our webinar last week. And unfortunately, we don't have a setup where we can all talk to one another using our voices, but we were really, really grateful that folks were so active on the chat with regards to sharing their ideas. And because of that, we read through the chat very closely again after the webinar was over, and we pulled a number of different comments that were made by some of you who were here last week with us. This slide has one of the most poignant comments that I think was put into the chat box, and it's kind of hard to know what to say in response to it. So I'm going to start by simply reading it. The person who put this in the chat said, "Today's children are seeing young children being taken away from their homes and their communities based on their skin color. It's triggering for adults that have lived through this, and it is feeding into a vicious cycle." Talking about identity, talking about identity-based stress, race-based trauma is at best tricky. And at worst, it can absolutely be triggering, right? So we thought it was really important to take this comment and to put it up front at the beginning of our webinar, not only because these conversations are always hard, but because in particular, what is happening in the world around us when we choose to engage in these sorts of conversations absolutely impacts how we show up and how this information lands with us. And I imagine the same is true for the children and the families that we work with. The past year has been particularly difficult in the United States for not only adults, but also young children of color with different ethnicities, especially immigrants to our country. I think that's probably where we're going to leave it from a presenter's point of view. If you all want to comment in the chat, please feel free to do so. But we want to thank whoever it was that was thoughtful and took the time to put this into the chat. And now what we're going to do is we're going to transition into the first main part of our conversation. And generally speaking, the most popular parts of presentations like these are those that give us good ideas, tell us what we can be doing. And that is absolutely what we intend to do in this part. We have gone through many different resources and we have narrowed it down to the top 5 categories of things that we think are important to talk about with regards to what all of us can do to either prevent and or help children recover from identity or race-based stress and trauma. So bear with us. This list is not it doesn't cover everything. I'm certain there are a million other good ideas about what we can do, but we thought this would be a good place to start. So the first thing of the what we can do, number 1, is we invite all of you to do whatever possible and whatever necessary to raise your awareness, to raise our collective awareness. And so one of the things that we might do first is to simply pause and think. What are the biases? And we talked about in our last webinar last week, a bias, what is it? It's just an automatic assumption that the human brain makes about different categories of people, foods, places, whatever it is. We can have positive biases towards things and people, and we can have negative biases towards things and people, and we all have them. Our biases are impacted by what we've been taught, what we've been shown, and our own personal experiences. They are also impacted by the media, so the movies and the music and the news, everything that we take in as human beings. So the first point is, please pause, please think about in the communities and the societies that you personally are residing in, what might be some of the common biases there, and how might those be reflected in our own personal biases? So, part of the way of overcoming biases or not having them, because most of us want to think, I'm not biased, I'm not racist. Well, great, right? Keep working towards that. But the reality is that we live in a society, in a country, in a world where racism is a thing, right? We value certain races over others, we value certain body types over others, all sorts of categories. There are biases associated with them. And the only way to begin to do better as a world is to start to think about how we carry these through our world. So a quick example, my own personal experience, I grew up in mostly an all white neighborhood, and all white. We had one family of color come into our neighborhood out of the entire time that I lived there from age 0 to 19. I went to college. I was the first person in my family to ever go to college. So I was in college, and it was the first time that I had ever had a teacher of color. And I remember in one of my very first interactions with her, the thought that occurred to me was, wow, she is so articulate. And then as I grew and as I got more exposure, I remember reflecting and thinking, why did that occur to me? Right? If she had looked like me, if she had looked like my mom, would I have paused to have that same thought? I don't know. And so the reason I share that is simply to invite you that we all have these ideas and expectations that if we're open to them and if we're aware of them, then we're much more able to overcome them, right? So keep your eyes wide open. Keep your minds wide open. That allows us to overcome what we've been taught subconsciously, and it allows us to keep learning, listening, talking to others. And the very last bullet there on this slide, there's a lot of different language associated with identity-based stress and trauma, but these are two terms that I'm certain almost all of us have heard of, but they're not out there widely and broadly. And so it may take a little bit of extra effort. Go look up historical trauma, go look up systemic racism, figure out what it means, what it might mean for the children that you're interacting with in your environment. So that is what we can do, number one. What we can do, number two, oh, sorry, the slide control is a bit delayed. Let me get back to two. There we go. So what we can do, number two, in addition to being aware, is to be present, open, and active. So the very first suggestion, I should say, on this slide is that it's important that we all acknowledge that no matter how much we want to be able to protect children, our children, the children that we work with, from things like discrimination, marginalization, racism, we will not be able to, right? I think sometimes adults have their heads in the sand where children's eyes are wide open and they're seeing things and thinking about things. And so, one of the things that we can do to help the children that we interact with be resilient in the face of identity based trauma and to prevent it is to become a person who is open to having these conversations. And that is a huge part of what makes us a safe person. So, feel free to use the chat. Tell us what you think that it means to be a safe person that youth can confide in. But we would recommend that being a person who makes it known to all the children in their class or all the children in their school and in their surrounding that, hey, you can come and talk to me about whatever, right? I am open to hearing, I am open to listening. No topic is off topic. And if you come to me when I'm too busy to have that conversation, we're going to find a time to loop back around to it later. Because if it's an idea that's important to you, it's one that's important to me as well, right? And then the third bullet up there, validate youth experience. Well, I am guilty of this as much as anyone else, but when a young person, a young child, the youngest in particular, come to us and tell us a story about something that hurt their feelings or hurt their body, our tendency is to want to immediately make them feel better. Oh, baby, I'm sure she didn't mean it that way, right? Or, oh, honey, here, let's come over here. We can forget about that. When it comes to identity-based trauma or stress in particular, instead of trying to make it better, to simply say, wow, thank you for telling me. Like, what was that like for you? How did that make you feel? And then validating it, right? Yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to agree with it. But before we try to help a child resolve or move on, simply letting them know that they're heard. can be huge. And then the last bullet up there talks about not only being a safe person, but doing what you can to impact the spaces that you are in with children. So anything that you can do to make a space more physically or more emotionally safe for all the children that you're trying to teach, and probably also for their families. I am not able to look at the chat, but Erica, please feel free if there's anything in there to throw it out there and or to respond as you see fit. Thank you. So number three, what can we do is to simply promote classroom. Well, once we pause and we think about what are the biases in my community? You know, is one skin color preferred over another? Is one food type of food considered normal and other types of food not so much? Once we know what these are, then we can be very active within our classrooms or within our settings to promote ideas and values that are incongruent, that are opposite from some of the biases that are out there. So if we choose the food bias, right? If we live in a community where there aren't a whole bunch of different types of restaurants, right? And there's no reason to believe that the children in our classroom have tried different foods, but maybe one or two children have. Maybe they have parents from another country. You know, what can we do to get ahead of the bias that says, ooh, I don't know what that is. I don't know why you're eating that. Well, again, with regards to promoting this idea that, gosh, isn't food amazing and it's so rich and there's so many types of vegetables and so many different spices and so many different ways that people prepare food, inviting a parent in to create something with the child, right? Or a type of food or something. That's just one example of what we can do. But anytime we can kind of beat a bias to the punch by knowing what the possibility is and presenting the opposite to it in a beautiful, inclusive way, that's going to give the children that we interface with an advantage.
And Tracy, if I can just jump in, there were a lot
Please.
of great responses in the chat, meeting kids where are at, approaching them with kindness and politeness from the very beginning, just allowing them to have that space and assuring them that they can confide in you and celebrating and embracing their differences in a number of different ways, including literature, conversation. So a lot of great comments in the chat there that I just wanted to put out there.
Thank you so much. And I'm assuming that some of those are part of what helps children feel safe and makes the space safe for kids. Thank you, Erica. So number four out of our five, our top five, is to talk about differences. So there has been movements in the past to where what we talk about are similarities. And we emphasize that we all feel certain things or we all do certain things to make us feel less different, right? To help form inclusivity by bonding over the things we have in common. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is equally, if not more powerful, to also recognize and celebrate the heck out of the differences, right? And we're talking about any kind of differences and all kinds of differences. And this should always be done in a way that's developmentally and or age appropriate. And it should be done on a consistent basis, ongoing over time. Many times we can both plan these sorts of conversations or activities with the kids in our classroom. And other times, it's simply being aware of a natural opportunity that presents itself and jumping in and saying, oh my gosh, you're right. Look at your hair. It's so big and curly, just like mine when I was a kid. Right? Unlike your bestie right here, right? Look at her long, beautiful, flowing hair. Isn't it cool how we all have different hairstyles in this classroom? Right? So taking advantage of natural opportunities to celebrate and call attention to differences, because the things we don't talk about, children get the message that they're not okay, right? When adults avoid certain topics, it's because something's wrong. So if we can call attention to differences in a way that normalizes them, all the better. And even the last bullet up there is simply a way of saying, well, maybe this is something you do all the time, so it's secondhand to you. Maybe you should be doing this webinar, or maybe not. Maybe this is something you don't do and you're a little nervous about it. Yeah, sure, join the crowd. anything, any new practice for us is going to get easier over time. So dive in and do your best and learn from how you do it and do it differently next time if you didn't nail it the first. The next slide here is actually a video that I want to share with you. And so Erica is going to stop sharing and I'm going to put up my screen to share in just a moment here. The reason we're showing this video is it's one of the many, many resources that we wanted to highlight, but it talks specifically and shows really good examples of how we can talk about these topics with our children. So it's produced by PBS. I'm going to share. Let's everybody cross our fingers that this goes smoothly and I don't mess something up as we're sharing here. So it's called How to Talk to Kids About Race. And the first clip I'm going to show you is about a minute long. And this is Amanda Gorman. She is the United States' first youth poet laureate, and she is brilliant and beautiful. And I just really liked the introduction that she provided, so I'm going to play a minute of that. And again, it's just kind of to inspire and give you all ideas.
My skin is brown as an avocado seed. Sometimes when we're talking about race, we're talking about other features too, like someone's hair. My skin and my hair are some of the things that make me who I am. They're what I love about myself. They're also things that others notice about me, and that's just fine. I notice what other people look like too. Noticing things about one another is how we start understanding each other and loving each other exactly as we are. And loving each other because we're different is how we make the world a fair place for all of us. Talking about things that make us the same and different helps us get to know each other better. Daniel Tiger and his friends do it too. Watch what happened one day at Daniel's school in this clip from Daniel Tiger's neighborhood.
So why are you feeling sad?
I have a tail.
You do have a tail.
But Miss Elena doesn't have a tail, and Chrissy doesn't have a tail, and you don't have a tail either. I'm different.
Daniel, the things that are different, like having a tail, are part of what make you, you. In some ways...
Okay, so I think we all know where that goes from here, right? But I wanted to show you that this is a 29-minute resource. So this is one part of it that I wanted to highlight because it really talks about and reinforces this idea that noticing differences allows kids then, well, it allows us to get to know each other better, right? It allows us to appreciate special things. And it also allows children to then articulate if they have a concern about something that might be different because differences are okay to talk about. So let me see if I can get you to the other. Here we go. And this is a clip that actually shows adults and children, in this case, parents and children, talking openly about race. So we're going to watch about a little bit over a minute of this one as well. And hopefully you find it interesting.
Why are there so many skin colors?
There are many skin colors because there are many different people all over the world with different nationalities and different cultures.
It's kind of like the crayon box where there's all kinds of different combinations, and then as people had kids and moved around, you start kind of mixing up those crayons and those colors.
Most of the times when we're talking about race, we're talking about identifying someone by the color of their skin.
So Sadie, who are the people in our family who are different races?
There's Peepaw,
Right.
who's black, Hominy, who's Korean, Bama, who's white, and Pops, who's black. That makes me half black, half white, half Korean.
Whoa, that's a lot of halves.
I have a lot of friends. Some of them have different skin colors than me. And I don't say, ew, you have such and such skin color. That's gross. I don't say that. I tell them you are beautiful and you are who you're supposed to be.
We want to raise you with a heart that sees those differences and celebrates those differences, not just see a difference and think poorly about it.
You treat somebody how you want to be treated, like yourself, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, it's okay to talk about your differences.
We've been taught that it's something not to talk about. And so the more we get comfortable with talking about our differences, the more we can learn to respect and applaud and celebrate our differences.
It's a great thing, actually, to notice differences in people because we're not different, but we're not the same. We're equal.
Yes.
Okay, Erica, I'm going to give it back to you now with regards to screen sharing, but I'm going to keep talking for a second here. So I hope that you found that commentary kind of as inspiring and entertaining as I did. I think that it elucidates a couple of different things. So it elucidates that kids are going to ask all sorts of questions. You know, why are there so many skin colors? And you're like, that's one I kind of want to be prepared for, right? It's good for me to kind of consume some of this so I know how I want to respond. And if we're not prepared, that's okay too. We give it our best shot and come back to that conversation later once we've had some time to think about it. But the other thing that I think it elucidates is the brilliance and the knowledge of children. So you heard one little girl in there say, you know, I don't treat people that way. I tell people, you're beautiful and you are exactly who you're supposed to be. And you're like, man, if half the adults that I knew could speak that cleanly and that honestly and that from the heart about race and identity differences in general, I think we'd be in a whole different place right now. Okay, so Erica, are you working on getting the slides back up there? Oh, I wonder if we lost
We did.
Erica.
We lost Erica
Okay,
temporarily.
well, I have the slides up and ready. So let me just get to where we were. I'm certain she'll be right back on, or I hope so. I was giving a presentation yesterday where someone was in a tornado, a co-presenter. Here she comes. Hey, Erica, we lost you for a second. We're glad you're back. Thank you for hopping back on so quick.
Thank you. My apologies.
No worries. So we're going to get to our next slide here. And this has our, there we go, number 5. This is our 5th one. So it was actually Erica who raised my awareness about this not so long ago. She said, you know, we talk about like health literacy and financial literacy, but why don't we talk about racial literacy? And I was like, oh my gosh, right? I've never thought about that. So in addition to wanting to celebrate differences, you know, I think that different cultures and different races are something that we should be educating our children about from the very start, right? So part of learning about, part of opening up topics like race and culture is what helps us communicate that these are things that are interesting. They're things that should be respected. They're things that should be valued and cherished, right? There are certain groups, especially here in the United States within our culture, that have specific individual histories. So part of learning about culture is to say, you know, what do we know about African Americans in our country? What do we know about them? What do we know about Latinos, about Asian Americans, about Native Americans, and about white Americans, right? We all have our stories. And there are hard parts and positive parts about all of those stories. But in order to make sure that we're embracing everyone right now, right, and not committing racism against any particular group, part of that is knowing about the other groups. The other thing that we have to keep in mind as we start as educators to think about how to simplify ideas, how to simplify stories, how to engage children into these, is to continue to help them understand while there are certain differences from culture to culture or from race to race, there's also a ton of differences that reside within each of those, right? So if I'm talking to my 8-year-old daughter about something, I'm going to say, hey, kiddo, do you think that every white 8-year-old little girl in the city of Chicago thinks the same way or likes the same things or wants to dress just like each other? No, right? And so to help kids understand that, yes, each group has its own history and has its own culture, but within each of those groups, there's all sorts of diversity. So we want to be aware, but we also don't want to make assumptions. We just want to be curious. Here is where we jump to another one of the slides that we developed thanks to you all. I'm making the assumption that some of you that were with us last week are here again today, and I hope that's a positive. I hope that that's accurate to some degree. These were some of the ideas that we thought were really, really worth uplifting. So some of your ideas about what to do. Well, one person says safety. Safety is my big thing. I think that people should teach that word early to kids. And then there was another person who talked about safety. That person in particular says, well, I tell my pre-K and my K students that our number one rule is to be safe. And the thing that I really liked about what this person wrote is that then they followed it up with saying, we talk about what that means all the time, right? So what safety means can vary from kid to kid, from classroom to classroom, and to make sure that definition is open and understood by everyone is a good thing. It's a great thing. The third thing on there, the third commentary that we pulled says, I try to make kids, I'm assuming kids, I try to make kids understand that words have effects, right? The words that they use impact themselves and those around them. So just, I mean, that's a really straightforward fact that how often is that in our lesson plan? Maybe it is. How often is that in our home? I don't know, but sometimes just to be aware and to steal these ideas, right? That others have shared with us. And then finally, the person who, I don't know who this is that we stole this idea from, but this person really likes to stress that every single person has a gift to share. And so part of our role as an educator or as another professional within the education system is to emphasize that and probably help children begin to recognize what are gifts that you have to share now and know that those may change over time. This is the final slide that we have borrowed or stolen from those of you who were here with us last time. And this is a summary of some of the ideas that came up when we asked you, what is one of the things that you can do in the next week related to the topic of identity and race-based stress? So we'll quickly read through them. One of them says, well, I'm going to do some daily affirmations with my students. Cool, great idea. Number two is what I refer to as catch them being good. So we're really good as grown-ups at catching kids being bad. It happens very naturally, right? But what we don't always do is look out and wait to see them being good and then to praise them for it. Sometimes we catch a kid being good, we don't want to say anything because we don't want to make it go wrong. But really the idea of this person is I'm going to look for opportunities, natural ones, where my kids in my classroom are being kind or showing acceptance, and I'm going to call it out and I'm going to praise it. Awesome. The third idea there is to use books in order to enhance diversity. Fourth, I love this. Move with love and be aware of myself, right? So self-awareness and love in the classroom. Number five is also watching for incidents where kids are not being treated well. So to make sure those don't go under the rug, or we're not, wanting to just kind of let it slide so that we can get to the work that we really have to get to. Number six, showing that you care. Number seven, listening more so that they feel heard. Eight, answering children's questions and being really mindful of using simple language that they're going to understand. Or that was eight. And then nine, being more mindful of my language and my body language, not only when talking to kids, but when talking to parents. And that's particularly important because, as Erica is going to get into, teachers don't have easy jobs. And I imagine that's true for the other folks working in educational systems as well, right? So it's really possible as a busy person running through my day that someone stops to tell me something or ask me something, and the look on my face is more about the stress I feel about something that I have to do versus what they've just told me. But it's really easy in those environments to be misread. So to be really mindful about what it is that you're communicating and how that shows up in your body and in your expression. So another thing that we know is that it's not only what a teacher does in the room, but it is also part of the school climate at large. And there's actually research that shows when school systems or institutions go out of their way to create a positive climate, then especially the children coming with minoritized identities have improved stress, improved overall well-being, and improved life satisfaction. So those are big deals. And then what is it that we mean by a positive school climate? This particular study that we took this from used these four examples, but it can probably mean any number of things. So they named, having policies that really promote kind of a child protection or just any School-based protective policies can look like anything. If you know of some and have some in your school, again, feel free to share examples in the chat. Number two, emphasizing social supports, right? So yes, families come to school for education, but if we know our families have other needs, what can we do to know about those resources or to connect families to those resources? Having supportive personnel. So sometimes what makes it or breaks it for a family is not how good the kid's teacher is, but how friendly the person is at the front desk, or the person there helping them get their kids out of the car, or the cross guard, right? So making sure that all of the people representing your school are seen as supportive and kind. And then number four, having an inclusive curriculum. So for our youngest children, again, that might mean having toys that reflect a wide variety of cultures. So not just dolls with different skin colors, but dolls with different clothing, right? Having the kitchen that shows the different kinds of food, playing different types of music from around the world in our classroom. So making sure that the exposure and the welcoming of diversity is there. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about what we can do for families. So just 2 slides on families, and we know that family engagement is hard or can be. So we want to acknowledge that, especially if we're talking about engaging families in topics like identity or racism, right? But what we're trying to communicate to you is don't wait to build this community, or don't wait to address these issues. Don't wait to start these conversations until something goes wrong. Instead, what can your classroom, or what can your school, even better, be doing to build a community or build opportunities where your school community, that means parents as well, begin to discuss these issues? Would it be possible to hold large or small group discussions about these issues? Would it be possible to play some of that video that I just played for you and to have conversations with the parents? What do you see up there? What do you like? What do you not like? What would you suggest we do in our school to promote well-being as it's tied to identity, right? What that means is, though, that we have to be very patient, because not everybody that walks into that school, not every parent is going to have a similar perspective or similar personal experiences. And so we have to invite folks, and we have to be patient when they ask questions that might feel hard, right? Or when they put out suggestions that don't feel quite right, and to engage that conversation and say, oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard about that, or I hadn't thought about that. Why would that be of a concern to you? Right? So to really build that community and then ultimately find the things that we all have in common. So almost every parent out there is going to want their kid to have a safe place to learn, right? Every parent out there probably is going to want to be able to feel supported by the school that they're in. So starting with the things that we have in common. And then this slide is just one activity that a teacher or someone else in the school could try. And earlier we talked about, really promoting values that are incongruent with some of the biases that are out there. And so these are just a few prompts, and we'd love for you to put your responses in the chat if you'd like to. But if you sat down with the kids in your classroom, or sat down with the parents in your classroom, or the parents of the children in your classroom, and said, gosh, we're going to work on a classroom mission statement. We're going to work on, in particular, what we can do to ensure that every kid is going to do their best learning in this environment. And let's start with these 3 prompts. Number 1, in order to learn, every kid must feel, what would you put? What would the families in your community put? What must kids feel in order to be able to learn? Every kid must feel safe. Every kid must feel loved, safe and included, respected, heard, accepted. These are great ones, guys. Valued, welcomed, beautiful, excellent. So let's go to the second one. When kids get hurt, they deserve. What do kids deserve when they get hurt? They deserve to be heard. They deserve comfort, empathy, to be taken care of, to be acknowledged, to be valued. Yes, 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 yes. These are hard things to disagree with. And then finally, when we mess up, and we will, us as professionals, our caregivers, as parents, and our children, when we mess up, we should, I think I wanted to put should up there. We should what? What should we do when we mess up? Apologize and acknowledge. That's a great one. Give grace, yes, to ourselves and to others. So you're getting the picture here, guys. This is just one suggestion. Take it if you'd like to. But I think at this point, you finally get to stop hearing from me. Is this right, Erica? Let's see. Oh, yeah. So we're going to transition with what we think is a really beautiful video, and we hope that you do as well. So I'm going to stop talking here, Erica, and if you can just give this a play, that would be fabulous. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
In a world so full of color, why would I choose to be colorblind? With all the blue in the sky and the green in my eyes and the orange of a monarch butterfly, why would I choose to be colorblind? See, so many teachers have said to me in an effort to promote inclusivity, I don't see color. An otherwise harmless statement, but when it comes to race, it's not quite the same as you think. What you mean is that you love all of your students equally. All the students you have the capacity to serve, but in actuality, your students are not all treated equally. And they're also different colors. The last thing you want to do when it comes to race is erase the things that make us unique, erase a piece of what we see staring back at us. It's not about not seeing color. It's not about negating it. It's about celebrating it and raising the voices of Black authors, Black activists, Black leaders, Black heritage, Black existence, but resisting the single narrative. Resisting the story that Africa is one big territory with nothing but huts and famine. It's examining our own biases, our own prejudices, and accepting that you are not immune to making mistakes. So make them. Then take them as an opportunity to learn, because isn't that what we're here to do? Isn't that the spirit we're fostering? It's exhausting being young and Black in the country we're living in. Your students are exhausted, but not giving it. When it's been 400 years, you learn to cope. So I hope you take their hands and make an effort to understand and see color. Then read about it. Go to BSU meetings, be about it, meaning roll up your sleeves and apply what you're learning. Don't rely on the one Black student in your class to carry their entire community on their backs. Don't ask them to preach, but allow them to speak their truth if they so choose, and use their name. Even if it's hard to pronounce, announce your allyship. Wave it like a flag across the room. You have the opportunity to make your space a safe one. So take it and name racism when you see it. It's not teasing, it's feeding the beast of white supremacy. So seize the moment to dismantle the hate and educate. It's what you do best. Address the uncomfortable. Lean into what is difficult to talk about, because it all starts with conversations, hard ones. We must talk about redlining, talk about healthcare inequalities, talk about employment disparities, talk about hair and how all hair types are professional. Racism is not conceptual, it is real and it is perpetual. It is not political, but it is critical that you use your audience to promote tolerance. Talk about it. Read about it and be about it. See color, then use it to paint a better future for your students.
Phew. I feel like I needed a breath after that as well. So feel free to take a breath and feel free to share any reactions to this video in the chat. Feel free to stand up and stretch, which I also encourage you to do if I have another hiccup like I did earlier. So if that happens again, knock on wood, it won't. And that Tracy will continue to move us forward, or you can stand up and take a stretch. I'll be back in a few seconds. Not sure what's going on with that, but just feel free to take a few breaths, and I will see powerful in the chat. Such a wonderful message. Powerful again. That's coming out for people. I share those feelings as well. So feel free to share in the chat as we continue to move forward and in the interest of time. And we will move to part two, where we talk a little bit about um, how this work impacts you as professionals. And I know we've kind of touched on this a little bit last week, and we know that's part of the focus for today's presentation as well. And we sort of hear the term well-being. What do we mean by well-being anyway? And I want to invite you to just drop in the chat anything that comes to mind. So when you hear the word well-being, what comes up for you? And if you're comfortable to share that in the chat. But it's really a complex concept, if you will, and really difficult to define. So there's been a lot of, I think, challenge with really looking at and examining well-being for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons is because it's really a complex thing to define. It's multidimensional. So depending on where you look, we may have anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10 domains of well-being that that are being looked at, whether it's physical, social, spiritual, financial, occupational. So it is very multidimensional. It's also subjective, and it's cultural, and it's dynamic all at the same time. So it can change over time and in different situations. So it's not this sort of fixed thing where if your well-being looks like this at one point in your life, that it's fixed or that it stays there. And I think that is probably hopeful to think about, because it means that if our well-being is not where we ideally would like it to be, that it doesn't have to stay there, and that there's something that we can do about it so that we feel like our well-being in any of those domains is getting better, or that it can get better. And so, well-being mentally, being happy, healthy, mentally stable, mental and physical positivity. Yes, so these are all aspects of well-being, and there. I want to invite you to kind of think back to when you first began to make a decision, or you were thinking about coming to work in education, whatever your role may be, teacher, administrator, other professional. And I'll probably age myself at some point, but just think about when you were starting to consider this, and think about whether or not you really had a sense that walking into this field, that there were going to be all this risk. I mean, I think it's a no-brainer. We know this work is difficult. We know that it's challenging. There's all sorts of things that come with educating, that come with being a teacher, that come with being an administrator. But my guess, and I shared this with y'all last week, because I started out, teacher came from a long line of teachers in my family, but nobody ever talked about the risks associated with doing this work, or, it's stressful. Yeah. But I had no idea of the challenges. So my guess is that maybe for some of you, that was your experience starting out. Like nobody said, hey, it's great you want to do this, but keep in mind, you might be at risk for anxiety and depression. There's going to be some interpersonal challenges, given that's life, but really, there's going to be some interpersonal challenges, right? There's going to be some health challenges that may be a function of doing this work. There may be compassion fatigue, burnout, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, identity related stress and trauma. And I'm wondering, when you hear all of these risks associated with this work, what comes up for you? And if you're comfortable, share that in the chat. Um, and I want to walk us through these last couple that are highlighted here: burnout, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and identity related stress and trauma, because I think sometimes we hear these terms, sometimes we may even use them interchangeably, maybe not intentionally. But when we think about burnout, it's important to know that anybody can experience burnout if you're working. And these are really symptoms resulting from the work environment and the things like high workloads, high caseloads in the classroom, a high student to teacher ratio, mounds of paperwork, but not having adequate support or access to resources to be able to manage that. Okay, so that can easily lead to burnout. And then when we talk about secondary traumatic stress, however, we are talking about the emotional distress, the emotional toll after hearing about someone's firsthand experience of trauma. Sometimes this can be your students, sometimes this can be the parents or caregivers, this could even be your colleagues. And so it's important to note that with secondary traumatic stress, we really want to think about symptoms. So an individual can have the same types of symptoms that mimic post-traumatic stress disorder. These can be symptoms of hyperarousal. These can be nightmares. These can be avoidance type symptoms. And I remember back when I first started teaching, I knew that the children that I worked with had some difficult home lives. I knew that the community that I lived and worked in was a challenging community. And I knew that stress was common, even for the professionals, even for the principals. But what I didn't know or recognize was the toll that it took on me. I remember quite often over the weekend just sort of dreading Monday mornings. And I want to ask you to raise your hand if you've ever been there. I want to ask you to drop an emoji in the chat if you've ever been there. And I remember calling off quite a bit on a Monday. And this was over 30 years ago. I told you I was going to age myself at some point. And so, the trauma field has completely emerged and evolved since then. And we were just, I won't say we were new because there were pioneers doing this trauma work long before 30 years ago. But we were, as a field, just really digging in and really putting it out there and saying, and raising the alarm to say, hey, this is happening here. But I didn't know it. And had I known it, I would have done something a little bit different to take care of myself. And then when we think about vicarious trauma, this is really a person sort of focused type of experience where there's absolutely a change in your inner experience and any expectations that you hold about your really almost like your worldview. So your sense of trust, your sense of control and safety and esteem resulting from sort of this cumulative buildup and exposure to the traumatic experiences of other people. And so it's important to kind of think about this when we think about the work, because I think it's very easy in the day to day to kind of go through the day without taking a step back to reflect on that and how what you're doing on a day to day basis and the kids that you come into contact with, the families that you come into contact with, your colleagues and other professionals, how is all of this impacting you and the stories that you hear? And not even the stories, but the things that you've probably seen with your own eyes. And so we want to be able to think about that and at least plant the seed. And hopefully the conversations will continue when you go back to your workplaces. But I want to show this particular video. We found this video and it talks about addressing teacher burnout, stress, and trauma. And you can look into the Niroga Institute. They have a lot of great resources as well, but it'll just give you a snapshot of kind of what we're talking about here. So I'm going to play that for you all.
Juliana Stratton's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate lobbyists and Trump donors. Juliana Stratton's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate lobbyists and Trump donors. Stratton super PACs caught taking money from a company that helps run the worst ICE facility in Chicago. Juliana Stratton, hypocrisy we can't trust.
Got a little ads.
Yeah, goals are stressful. I mean, there's a lot going on, the demands of a teacher these days. As a leader, I'm very aware of, the threshold, that breaking point, the burnouts, and, the sustainability of a teacher it's very delicate.
Education as a profession is basically the only social service that doesn't require, as part of its credentialing or ongoing credentialing process, some sort of way to process stress and trauma. Most police, fire, EMT agencies, if there is a death or a major traumatic event, they're at least required to do a couple hours of therapy to jump back on their rigs or get their gun and their badge back. Educators are expected to go for as long as 30 or 35 years with absolutely nothing to help us process stress and trauma. And we hold a lot of vicarious trauma for the students and families that we serve.
It's burnout. It's inability to deal with the stress. Because a tolerance level that's been exceeded. You're dealing with all the forces that work in a public school. A lot of stress, anxiety, and chaos that's coming at them, a lot of energy coming at them every day. And I think mindfulness gives us a force field that helps them take that in, but not let it affect them in a negative way. It helps them deal with it in a more healthy and patient manner.
All right, and there's a link for you at the end there. But if you're comfortable, just share any reactions to this video. I know it was short, but I thought they said a whole lot. And if there was anything that stood out to you from what was shared in the video, drop that in the chat. And one of the things that, and I'm just checking the chat to see, and one of the things, and I did see people raising their hands from the conversation earlier, the question. Yes. We can't stop to take care of ourselves because we're busy taking care of our students' needs. Yes, the percentage of teachers that leave the field, making you think, kind of where you are compared to the stress from a police officer to a teacher, and you're expected to return the next day. Yes, teachers aren't provided any help when they're going through trauma, especially when your students are facing trauma as well. Yeah, so that's an interesting reality, right? And a hard reality to kind of come to terms with. Um, and I agree the expectations to return the next day without any type of support, without any type of help. And so one thing question that I want to pose to you to just reflect on, you don't have to share anything in the chat unless you absolutely want to, but one of the things that was mentioned, just sort of when you're exposed to your environment, whether it's in your classrooms, in the school setting, or even in the surrounding community, just being able to absorb all of that energy based on what's coming at you, either from what the students are experiencing, what you may be experiencing yourself, what your colleagues may experience, how at the end of the day, where does that energy go? How do you unpack that or take all of that off? And it's one thing to ask, okay, what do I do at the end of the day to unwind or take care of myself? But it's another thing to ask all of that energy that you just kind of took in from the day, what do you do with that? Where does that go? And it's just something to think about because professionals I know we spent a lot of time talking about the impact of identity-based trauma on our young people, but we as professionals, you as teachers and educators, are also at risk for experiencing identity-based trauma based on one or more of your own identities, whether it's race, whether it's age, whether it's ability, whether it's gender, right? So these types of experience can also impact you. All of this impacts your well-being. It can impact your interpersonal functioning, which can show up how based on how you perform in the classroom, in the larger school and larger community settings. Um, it can impact your ability to recognize these types of identity-based traumatic experiences in your students. And it could go a number of ways. You can respond effectively and sensitively, or you can be completely checked out to the point where you can't recognize these and you can't address something that you can't recognize or that you're not aware of. And so when we're bringing to the table our own trauma, identity-based trauma, race-based trauma as a professional, it's going to show up in one form or another in our personal and professional life. It impacts how we're able to regulate ourselves emotionally, behaviorally. How do we kind of um, manage those thoughts and feelings that come up if we're triggered by something our students do in the classroom, or get triggered by a particular behavior, or even by behaviors from our colleagues. And so it's important to note that even educators of color can carry racialized trauma that they've either experienced outside of the classroom, but it's a real thing and it happens also within the school setting. And Tracy mentioned earlier how it's important to kind of name these types of experiences and bring them to the forefront and talk about them, because I think historically there has just been a stigma that we don't talk about these things, or we don't think that these things can occur in settings, and certainly not in schools where we are all teaching and young minds, and we all love children and we love people, but they do happen. And so I want to pose a question, and if you're comfortable, I would like for you to share some examples in the chat of ways that racial trauma can show up for educators or other professionals in the school setting. And these can be covert examples or overt. And if you recall from last week, we talked about how those covert things can be easily missed. They're kind of subtle, they're kind of hidden. And so they're easily overlooked. And over may be just really in your face. They could be just comments, physical aggression, really obvious things. So what are some ways that racial trauma can show up for educators, okay, for teachers, for the professionals, the adults in the school setting? And if you're comfortable, you can share in the chat, and I'll just take a look to see. Yes, okay. Sexual harassment from coworkers, triggers by colleagues. Yes. Coworkers saying certain things that are triggering. Yeah. Yeah. And sort of, that's one of the things, right, in terms of this, how it shows up, because there's a difference between intention and how something makes the other person feel or how they experience something. And it's easy to write off, oh, if a joke is harmful, oh, I didn't mean it like that, or everybody jokes, or it wasn't intentional. But how did it make that other person feel? How did they experience it? And so it's important to be mindful of these things. And an example here, if you ever get a chance, Dr. Lisa Collins, she's a professor, a researcher, an author. You can check out her website, but she wrote about her own experiences and published it. And we have a citation here, um, about her own experiences with racial trauma in a school district, in a particular school. And an example that she shared of sort of how it looked, and she shares quite a few examples, but I put one here. as she was a professional, she was a researcher, and she was an administrator, but she did not have keys to the school building. She was not allowed to have keys to the school building. And so this may seem simple or not complex, but it's those small things that let people know that you're not important, you're not valued, or you're somehow less than. And so it can show up in a number of different ways. So if it's something that you haven't thought about, I want to invite you to spend some time thinking about it and taking a step back and just saying, hey, what was this experience like for me? Especially when if you notice yourself feeling a certain kind of way by certain comments or so, and these can be not necessarily comments from your colleagues, although that happens as you all just shared in the chat, but these can be comments from students. These can be comments from parents or caregivers, your authority being undermined because of your race, as an example, or any other aspect of your identity because you are a certain gender or because maybe you have some challenges in a certain ability. Okay, so things to think about. And I know we were kind of focused on race-based trauma there, but that brings to point another question because these are real experiences. They're really difficult. They're really challenging. They impact how you're able to show up, how you're able to support your students and the kiddos. But somewhere along the way, we have this mindset, and don't get me wrong, self-care is great. It's important. We need it. But somewhere along the way, we have this individualistic mindset that it is just our responsibility. And as so many of the individuals shared in the videos that we've watched, and Tracy shared, that it's everybody's responsibility, right? So when you ask yourself who's responsible for wellness at your workplace, it's everybody's because when systems and organizations are broken, people are broken. So we can self-care all day, every day. But if the system is still broken, we're still going back to a broken system, broken policies, broken dynamics, broken culture. And so individual self-care is no longer enough. Trauma occurs not just outside of schools, but within schools. Um, and that's a hard thing to think about too for some people. And so this work must be collective. And everyone is responsible for workplace wellness. The onus is not just on one person, it's everybody's responsibility. It's the administrators, it's your colleagues, it's everybody's responsibility. And so I want to share this quote that just kind of reminds us that, we heal in community. And Psychology Today, they printed an article, I think it was last year, where they were talking about community is medicine that heals. And some of the things that they were just stressing were just the importance of healing, not just being about a prescription or pill, but really about connecting to other people and sort of sharing purpose, sharing experiences, sharing space, and how equity should just be a fundamental, a basic design principle for any institution and organization. And we know historically that has not been the case. And so it may be overwhelming to think about. And we're going to talk about strategies in just a little bit. Yes, Adriana, thank you. Um, and I was just looking at some of the comments in the chat. Many people are suffering from mental health issues as a result of COVID and being isolated. Yeah. And that just speaks to the importance of how collectivism, community, and connections are really part of the healing process, right? And so, some things to just keep in mind in terms of support is just making sure that you are establishing those clear boundaries. And that's something that, yes, we do individually, but then we may need the support from our administrators and supervisors when we want to kind of protect time for planning and protect time for collaboration. And what does that look like if you never have time to plan, you never have time to collaborate? And so those types of things should be protected, they should be honored. Um, and then what opportunities exist where we can regularly check in with ourselves throughout the day to monitor kind of our own stress and felt sense of safety? You're pretty fabulous at it when it comes to the kids and keeping them safe, physically safe. maybe even psychologically safe, but it's a parallel process. So you have to do the same thing for yourself. You know, if you think back to the infamous pre-K and kindergarten circle, first thing in the day, everybody, all the kids come in, you sit around the circle and you go up and point to the face that describes how you're feeling today. Because we know if Tracy picks the face where she's having a bad day, we might need to be super supportive with Tracy today. But we have to do the same thing. As educators, do we come in the beginning and have our circle time? And so we kind of have to seize those opportunities for reflective practice supervision and staff circle time, affinity groups, mindfulness. You know, what does that look like? And so these are all ways that we can kind of not just create that safety for the classroom and for the kids, but also for ourselves, because we know that if we are not well, those children, those babies aren't gonna be the best they can be. They may be okay, but when we are able to be our best selves and show up as our best selves and feel safe and not have to worry about the harassment or the comments or the jokes from anybody, that you know, it's better for everyone. And so how do we prevent or address this identity-based trauma for professionals is, you know, going back to some of the things that were shared earlier, we have to challenge those harmful narratives, um, whether it's being put forth by other people or even the narratives that we internalize, right, about ourselves based on what's portrayed in the media or things that we've seen or have been kind of indoctrinated with for years. Challenge those about yourself as a professional based on one or more of your identities, including race. You know, call those things out. And then whenever we notice differences that arise when it comes to identity, how do we model and appreciate respect for those differences? You know, we talk about them, we acknowledge them, and what we're doing is not only helping ourselves, but we're modeling too for our students, right? And then co-creating a school and a work climate that reflects a culture of wellness and builds racial literacy, awareness, and skills. And so, and these can show up and look like a number of different things, but the first step is to sort of be intentional for ourselves. And again, you know, if you're barely getting your family out the door in the morning, nobody ate breakfast. You're just right in time to punch in so that you're not late. And then you're going into class. The staff, support staff have already started bringing the kids in. So you really don't have a minute to put your bag down and go use the bathroom, let alone do participate in the staff circle, right? So how can we be intentional about this? And this is not to suggest that these things aren't happening or that you aren't doing those. But we also know the realities of life and real life and just things come up on a day-to-day basis, or we're busy putting out fires. And so how do we create that space to honor ourselves is so very critical. So what I want to do is just check in, because I know we've shared a lot, and just to see how folks are doing. If you want to put a thumbs up or an emoji in the chat, feel free to do that. And while you're doing that, I do want to acknowledge a couple of comments in the chat. And someone shared that there was a self-care retreat, which is amazing. And the big question was to ask coworkers how they were really feeling and have check-ins throughout the day. That's awesome. Some of you are feeling a little exhausted, but yes, tomorrow is Friday, so maybe that hopefully provides a little motivation. Excited for spring break. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And so we just have a few more things to share. I think I'm going to hand it off to Tracy for part 3, and we'll walk through some resources that we think will really be helpful for folks.
Thank you, Dr. Millsaps. I personally think you nailed that. Appreciate it. So I'm going to just tell you about a handful of resources that are specific to supporting children, and then I'll pass it back to Erica, and she's going to tell you a little bit about some resources for the professionals. So as I said before, there's just a ton out there. We just wanted to highlight a few. For those of you that are not yet familiar with the NCTSN, these initials down here, this acronym, it stands for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And I meant to put their link on this page. It is nctsn.org. It is a fabulous website and has way too many things on it, but it has an entire section on identity and race-based trauma. And then these are just some of the resources we wanted to call attention to. So there's the Creating Safe Places for LGBTQ Youth. There's Addressing Race and Trauma in the Classroom. There's the Impact of Trauma on Youth with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And there's Talking with Children about Islamophobia and Hate-Based Violence. These are not all of the resources that they have of this nature, just a few. So I urge you to check them out. This next one here, so PBS has a few different really great resources about talking about race. If you haven't seen it, in 2021, I think it was, the American Psychological Association, so the organization that Eric and I belong to as psychologists, partnered with Sesame Street, and they made a lot of different things, but they made the See Us Coming Together video. So it is on Hulu and HBO Max, but you can find a 24-minute shortened version of it on YouTube. And it's a really great video about a puppet who is Asian American who was told to go home, like go back to where you came from. And then PBS is providing a whole bunch of, excuse me, I'm tripping over my words, a whole bunch of different types of resources like worksheets and stuff that parents and teachers can use if they wanted to use this video with children as a way of kind of addressing the fact that this sort of thing happens and how we can think about it and how we can respond to it. This next one here, oh, forgive me, this last one was just PBS. This is the one where the APA, American Psychological Association, partnered with Sesame Street, so my apologies. These are actually a set of workshops for grown-ups, even though they've got this cover, so just wanted to call attention to it. It comes with a bunch of different handouts focused on racial justice for caregivers and families. This is the Child Mind Institute, another really great organization for all things related to mental health. So we're highlighting here one of their resources, which is talking to kids about racism and violence. So supporting children while navigating our own big emotions. Please check it out. The next one up is called Media Smarts. This one is interesting. It's based out of Canada, but it specifically provides education for educators and other adults, but it highlights educators, specifically for teachers, with regards to how media impacts our children and a bunch of different things. So this one is under the category of stereotypes, and this is specific to talking to kids about racial stereotypes. This is called the Center for Racial Justice and Education. It is another institution that is meant specifically to support teachers, all sorts of different resources and workshops for continuing education, specifically for educators. This is a center called the Center for Inclusive Childcare, and I believe it's actually based out of Minnesota, if I'm remembering. So it provides all sorts of hands-on training and consultation for free for people in Minnesota, but even those of us outside of Minnesota can access, there's a resource library here. I don't know if you can see, oh, you can't see my cursor because I'm not slide sharing, but if you look there in the bar, there's a resource library. That's where we found this list of 37 books, and it has books. You can sort it by ethnicity and by age of the child. So I think it's recommended for 0 to age 12. So just another good resource that we wanted to highlight. This is interesting. This is just a child care. It's a preschool, and I can't remember what state it's in, my apologies, but I pulled it up and put it on here as an example of showing it's not only reading that you can find if you go out there and do the search, but this school actually posts a list of different types of anti-racism, right? So, you know, activities that are to promote inclusivity, right, and acceptance and diversity over racism for specifically preschoolers. And in there's the Apple activity on this page too that one of you all mentioned in the last webinar that we had, and that might be the end of the resources. Yep, now I'm going to pass it. Oh, sorry, Erica, I think I skipped one.
No,
It's
yeah.
back to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, those are all great resources. And so we'll share a couple that are specific to adults and systems now. So the Centers for Disease Control has a collection of resources and lessons specifically related to school health. So they have school wellness guide that you can explore and look at, borrow components from, and see how you might integrate those. But I would encourage everyone to just go in, check it out, browse. Teacher wise, you may be familiar with this. Another great resource, and it's a program, it's empirically supported, which is awesome because that means that they studied it. There's some research and there's some data and evidence to say it works, it's helpful. And they look at the 5 domains of well-being for teachers and school staff. And so they have a whole curriculum. Like you can, if you go up here, you can register and sign up. You can look at the curriculum. You can reach out to them. They offer consultation and links to a whole host of other resources. So that's another great resource. And then we have WISE. The interesting thing about this program, again, it provides a number of different resources. There's a ton of toolkits on here, but their mission is really focused on ending the stigma associated with like mental health, substance abuse, and things of that nature. And I saw in the comments earlier somebody mentioned that yes, professionals are struggling with their mental health as well. And sometimes, resources may be limited outside of maybe an EAP, or you have to use your benefits and go see your therapist or something like that, and professional help when needed, and that's perfectly okay to do. But this particular organization kind of really focuses on, how do we move past that stigma, and it's talking about compassion, resilience, and they have a whole section where they focus on school partnerships for well-being. So I think it's really fabulous because we talked earlier about how sort of there's this stigma or this just being uncomfortable with talking about these things as real life experiences as human beings. And I think once we move past, for some people, not to suggest anybody here is uncomfortable, but we may know people who are uncomfortable. And I think once we move past that, we begin to see that we can make progress. And the more that we welcome these types of conversations and even grapple with them, the better off we are. And then finally, this core collaborative, corecollaborative.com, talks a lot about the school climate, equity and inclusion, and they have a list of books to understand race and equity in schools. So we talked earlier about just sharing strategies and resources to help you continue learning. Just to give you an idea of some of the titles of these books. Why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? That's a pretty popular one. Beverly Tatum. How to be an anti-racist, Ibram Kendi. And I know that one is controversial, and I think it's really because sometimes we misunderstand it. But I think if we were to really unpack it, we will see, oh, this is what we're all talking about, or most of us are talking about anyway. White fragility, why it's so hard for white people to talk about race. Robin DiAngelo, another great popular one. And so there's a lot of lists of books on here that will help expand your awareness. So if you're just curious and you want to know more, this is a good place to check out. And so as we summarize the points from today's session, we hope that you just walk away with and remember there's a lot of things that you can do to buffer the impact of minority stress and trauma on the children that you work with, whether you work with them directly or indirectly. It's important, and we know that you know this, that you take care of yourselves, because the impact of this work
So I think Erica may have just frozen there. So I'm going to jump in here for a second, and we could all actually, you could use this as a chat text. She said the impact of this work is right. So feel free to finish your sentence if you'd like in the chat, but I'm pretty sure she was going to say the impact of this work can be both amazingly wonderful in our classrooms on the children and the families that we're working with, and it can also be really draining and exhausting for us as individuals. I think that we had gotten, I'm looking over here at my other screen, and I'm pretty sure that we had gotten to our, oh, we've got one more slide. So I'm going to go ahead and share
Hopefully
my
that was a
screen.
nice stretch break. I told y'all, just stand up and stretch for a quick minute. I'll be right back. But yeah, so um, just noticing and celebrating differences, that's really important. And really working collectively to co-create that climate that supports well-being for everyone, right? Because that's the ultimate goal. So we do want to end you with an invitation to just reflect, creating safe classrooms. In order to do that, professionals must be well and feel safe too. We focus on the kids, but this is relational. There's interconnectedness all around, and so we all have to feel safe. And it's really, um, I think, a difficult expectation for our kids to feel safe if we don't feel safe as the adults. And so, if you feel comfortable dropping in the chat, one doable thing, and even if you don't feel comfortable, write it down somewhere in your notes, in your notebook. If you got your journal handy, write it there. Put it in your phone if you put your notes in your phone. But one doable thing that you can commit to doing in the next week, based on everything that we've talked about. I know we've shared a lot, but if maybe there's something that stood out to you, or you made a note that you wanted to circle back to. But what's one doable thing that you can commit to doing in the next week? Thank you. Resting. Yes, Brian. I'm assuming that's your response to this question. Yes. Take care of me so you can be the best me and present when you're at school. Supporting discussions on race and being intentional, self-care, consider your own mental health, making time for yourself, taking time for yourself. That one's coming up a lot. Hopefully, if spring break is coming up for folks, you'll have more time to do that. Taking deep breaths when needed. And I'm thinking back to those Mondays that I was calling in, and even when I didn't call in, if I had just walked in and just taken a few deep breaths to center myself, because it's okay to feel that way, but I had to do something. I had to be active in centering myself, but I didn't know then. And so hopefully you can share those powerful reminders with your colleagues and with other folks. But here's our information. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you have questions about anything that maybe we didn't get to today, feel free to reach out to Tracy or myself. And I'm gonna invite Tracy to share any final um, comments. But you guys have been um, truly, truly a wonderful audience and thoughtful group of professionals. Thank you for all that you're sharing in the chat with us too. We love it.
Yeah, I would emphasize the thank you for coming. Thank you for being so active, for being open. I'd also say that there were a ton of really fabulous ideas in here about how to self-care, but I challenge you to get even more specific and to create the tiniest test. So in here, it's like care for myself. Okay, Hattie, what does that mean? Right? Name it. What is one small thing you can do to care for yourself in the next week? Because and not only you, Hattie, same for me, same for all of us. But, the more we can name it and think very specifically, what is one tiny thing that I can do, the more likely it is to actually happen. So please keep that in mind.